is India's growth slowing? What's causing this economic slowdown? Where did the Indian economic growth story went wrong? As we all know that the Indian economy is in the doldrums, and we are excited to bring to you Suno India's new series Indian Economy Explained. Hi, I'm Kunika Balhotra, Research and Communications Officer for Suno India, and your host for this new series Indian Economy Explained. And I'll take you through questions and queries like how the economy impacts us, how the GDP is calculated, and how it is dependent on the production and consumption of goods and services in the country. In our first video, we have Dr. Biswajit Nag with us. Dr. Nag is a professor and head of economics division at the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, and he will help us understand the GDP figures and why its fall in the recent times matters to all of us.
There are many methods in which GDP is calculated. In case of India, it is generally done in two ways. One is basically through adding the gross value added, what we call GVA, from different sectors. So that's basically the income generated from different sectors. And another method is what we call expenditure method. So in value-add method, which is basically a factor cost, so it's based on, say, what is the income coming from agriculture, from manufacturing, from services. So in general, there are a few common sectors that whenever you read any newspaper or any discussions on GDP just after the budget, so you'll find out there are mostly 8 sectors on which actually India is focusing. One is agriculture, forestry, and fishing together, then mining and quarry, then manufacturing as a whole, electricity, gas, water supply, then constructions, and then trade, hotels, transport, and communications, and then financing, insurance, real estate, business services, and then community social service and personal services. So this is basically collecting the income. As you know, the GDP is basically how much is the country has generated in terms of value, the value of the products in a particular year. So these are the sectors from where the incomes are actually being calculated. Another way of looking at it is basically from the expenditure side. So which is basically the market price, how much actually being spent. So it could be like, consumption expenditure by individuals, so what we call private final consumption expenditure. There could be government expenditure, then gross fixed capital formations, that means how much assets has been built up in the country in that particular year. Then there are exports, imports, some small discrepancies and changes in the stocks. So these are the two ways basically we try to measure basically the GDP in a particular year. GDP number, which is just like a, it's tip of the iceberg. It says a lot of things, at the same time it doesn't say anything because it's just a number. Most of the time, what you see in the newspaper is the GDP growth rate. Say, for example, currently, India's GDP in the last quarter reduced by more than 10%, and we are expecting that at the end of the whole year, 23% actually. And the end of the whole year, it could be maybe more than minus 10% GDP will get reduced. So common people actually keep in mind that the growth figure, but how actually it affects the common people and how actually it affects the investors. So let me just look at from a different angle. If you look at the GDP figure, which is basically how much of the income of a particular country has increased in a particular year. So think of, forget about a country, think of an individual. One individual's income has increased by 5% or 10% in a year. That means that individual has worked hard to earn that money. So that means if you look at from a country's perspective, so that means country has really worked well so that its overall income has increased. So GDP does not tell us the distribution aspects, that how much has been earned by farmers, how much has been earned by salaried classes or the business people. It basically tells you the overall. But if you just go one step ahead, as I just mentioned, answering your first question, that GDP is calculated as a summation of different incomes generated from different sectors, which is value added, what we call. So in that case, what will happen if we just go one step ahead and try to find out what are the incomes of different sectors, then actually we will get a better picture. So you can find out how much was the growth in agriculture, how much is the growth in manufacturing, how much is the growth in trade, depending on their share in the GDP. For example, maybe agricultural share could be around less than 20%. Manufacturing share could be around 17%. Okay, industry as a whole, maybe around 30%, which includes mining, quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, constructions. Those are all part of industry. So when we see that which sectors are growing, suppose if we see that construction sector is growing, right? So if we see construction sector is growing, that means the people who are involved in construction sectors, their income has grown more than maybe the other sectors. So the people who are actually working in this sector, whose livelihood depends on those sectors directly, indirectly, when construction sector is actually growing, so their lives are actually getting, some kind of positive benefit out of it. That's the way basically the common people's life is actually get influenced by the GDP figure. So you can understand a bit of overall improvement in the life. But as I just mentioned, this is a gross figure. You will not be able to understand the distributional aspects of it, that whether GDP is accrued by the top 5% people in the country, or it is well distributed down the line. So even the poorest of the poor are also getting the equal share of the GDP. That we are not able to say from the GDP number as such. For that, economists need to do a lot of research to find out how the GDP is calculated to lower level. Coming back to the second part of the question, which is how actually investors actually are getting influenced. Investors, you can think of a domestic investor, you can think of foreign investor also. Now, for foreign investors, definitely GDP growth rate is a positive number because they do not know the country much. So they will be very much influenced by some of the basic indicators of the economy, which are highlighted in international media, or sometimes some research is done by some agencies. They will tell that this will be the projected growth, and this growth will be coming from these sectors, as I just mentioned about the construction sector, or it could be from the trade sector. Okay, so the foreign investors will then find out, okay, these are the sectors which is growing in that country, and if the ease of doing business is relatively better, and they find confidence in that country, so they will be positively influenced. They might take a decisions to invest in that country. For the domestic investors, they are inside the country. Many of them are already invested in different sectors, so they have better information. So just GDP growth rate is not that influential on their investment decisions. Their investment decisions depends on much deep-rooted understanding of the economy, because sometimes what happens, there could be a sudden rise in one sectors and then it tapers off because of certain reasons, and that informations are there very much there in the domestic investors. But overall, a positive GDP or higher GDP growth rate is having a kind of a positive influence on the investor.